Welcome to episode 31 of the Veganism Debunked podcast. Today I'm joined by Patrick from Foolproof Mastery. Patrick is an activist in the London animal rights scene whose social media content includes ethics, philosophy, nutrition and outreach content. Recently, Patrick made a comment on an Instagram video uploaded by the username Nothing Is Art, which talked about abolition of predation in nature. Patrick commented on the video that if someone does not care about quote-unquote wild animal rights, that they are not vegan. Today I talked to Patrick about this comment, his controversial views on predator control, and other issues relating to wild animal rights and whether they're included within the scope of veganism. Alright, so Patrick, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, George, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I know you've had some great guests such as Patricia Nonis, Danny Ishay, James Aspey. So yeah, I'm flattered to be part of this great bunch of guests.
Yeah, no problem at all. I always like to get on people who have interesting views about things and people who can offer kind of unique insight, which is why I chose you as a guest on this, because I came across a comment of yours recently on Instagram. It was a pretty disturbing video, in my opinion, of I think it was a zebra being eaten alive by a pack of lions. And, you know, I muted the video as soon as I opened it because the sounds were just horrible of this poor being eaten alive. And there were some comments there, but the video basically said that abolishing predation should be the end goal if we care about animals. And there was, you know, some back and forth from vegans in the comments section about this, but your comment to me really stood out. You said, let me see, I've got it here. If someone doesn't care about wild animal rights, they're not vegan. Tell me why you wrote that comment.
All right, so I wouldn't have written that comment if I didn't see, you know, the comments from other vegans in the comment section. And, you know, there was one comment by, was it Little Vegan Artist?
Yes.
And I'll tell you what they wrote. They write, the lions are having lunch. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, tell me what you didn't like about Little Vegan Artist's comment.
So, you know, what I care about is sentient individuals, sentient beings. And so in this case, you know, we got one sentient being torn to shreds. And, you know, you can sort of run a log consistency test. I would, you know, wonder what they would think if a human was being torn to shreds. You know, would they say the same sort of comment? You know, the lion's just having lunch if it was a human or a dog?
Yeah. So there were some inconsistencies there, I guess, that you were pointing out. Here's the thing, though. Why is someone, because I think vegan is about the exploitation of animals by humans. So why is it then that you would say someone's not? I mean, I do have some insight on this that I can offer, but why would you personally say that someone is not vegan if they don't care about wild animal suffering, or if they just wrote a seemingly quite, like, I'm going to say it was quite a blasé comment from Little Vegan Artist, I think, you know, just a lion having lunch. And I can go more into that in a bit, but here's the thing, like, I kind of want to get into whether wild animal suffering even is a part of veganism, because from your comment, it maybe might insinuate that it is a part of veganism. I don't know.
Yeah, so basically, I'm sort of using a definition which I can go into about veganism. But before we sort of go into the definition which I'm using, we have to sort of get to what makes, you know, a good definition. Like if something is, you know, prone to, you know, reductios on the definition, then I'm someone who thinks it's okay to modify the definition and get a better, you know, definition. So, for example, you said veganism is about, what was it, the exploitation of animals by humans, right? So when you say humans, do you mean Homo sapiens?
Yeah, I would guess so.
So if there was, you know, a subgroup of humans who then took a DNA test and, you know, they were found out to not belong to the species Homo sapiens, would it then, be vegan for them to factory farm pigs? For me, no.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't. And I think in that case, yeah, we could alter the definition. I agree with that. I think definitions can change as things change. So I agree with you there. But in this current world that we live in, without that obviously hypothetical, we would just use the term humans because that is the ultimately what the movement's about. But yeah, in this world that you talk about in the hypothetical, say there were these like humanoid beings doing it, yeah, they wouldn't be vegan. And I'd happily adjust the definition to say the exploitation of animals by humans and haymans or whatever it might be. Sure.
So yeah, I'm just about having a really good definition that is not prone to reductios, these, where someone makes a contradiction. And so, for example, if we take, the vegan society definition of veganism as well, where you just use the word animals, right? If you don't sort of define what you mean by animals, again, you can create hypotheticals where you get strange sort of reductio. So a reductio is when you sort of negate a proposition, and from that negation of the proposition, you make a contradiction. So, for example, if, we're going to say animals, just animal, sentient beings who belong to the kingdom Animalia, then if you're going to, use the vegan society definition of veganism, then it will be vegan to, factory farm, Santa's elves or Wookiees from Star Wars, because they don't belong to the kingdom Animalia.
Right. But why would you say that? I'm still maybe not clear on why this would mean. I mean, I do have my own opinions on this, as I say, but why would it mean that if someone doesn't care about wild animals suffering, so it's not something they're doing themselves, it's not about animals being farmed, it's not about the exploitation of non-human animals, they just say, oh, this is nature, this just happens in nature. And I think a lot of vegans have this view. You would call those people not vegan?
Yeah, and I would not, yeah.
Give me because I think your reasoning so far has been maybe quite, philosophical. Give me a simplified layman's version of why they're not vegan to the audience, because I think they just want to hear, why would Patrick say I'm not vegan if I just say, well, it's nature, it's a lion having lunch, whatever, and yeah.
So yeah, I'll give you the definition of veganism that I use, and then we can go from there if that's all right.
Sure.
Right. So the definition of veganism, which I use right now, the first time I heard about it, it was from Danny Ishay. He mentioned it in one of his videos. He said veganism is about the extension of human rights to non-human sentient beings. Then there was someone called Nutrivore who came up with initial definition, where it was about, I'll tell you roughly what it was. It was like, veganism is an implied ethical view which advocates for the trait-adjusted extension of commonplace human rights to non-human sentient beings, right? So this definition was good until some people brought out, a reductio on this definition, right? So the reductio on this definition is that human rights are prone to change. So, for example, if tomorrow it became, murder became legal, then it would be vegan to, perform murder. So then someone called Aputa, he sort of looked at this definition and he revised it further. And so in brackets, there's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to mean human rights. So it's like indexed to this book, which is what we typically believe, human rights at this current moment. So then that got rid of that reductio, where if human rights were to change, then, vegan actions would have to change in alignment with the human rights changes.
Is there a danger here, though, that the definition is just being tweaked too much and being overcomplicated, and we should maybe we have... Look, I do agree definitions can change as time goes by, but are we not here kind of running away too far away from what the original kind of just simple definition was, that was easy to understand. And now we're in some kind of territory where it's like someone is not vegan because they said something that actually had nothing to do with a violation of vegan values.
Well, I don't know. I think it is, if you take animals in the wild, I don't personally care whether it's in nature or not. I still feel like sensitive beings being violated. And when I say rights violation, what I mean is, an action between two sentient individuals that would be wrong to perform in a vacuum. All right. So I'll tell you why I say in a vacuum, because with countervailing considerations, it could be okay to perform rights violations. So, for example, self-defense. And then I've spoken to many sort of a few vegans who they would not be okay with committing one rights violation to create a vegan world. And so that for me is a little bit like, do you actually, is it for you about being pure, or is it about creating a vegan world? So yeah, for me, it would be vegan to perform one rights violation if it would end animal agriculture forever.
Well, I know the group of people you're talking about, and I know why they throw this word utilitarian around as a pejorative, because the people who are throwing the word utilitarian around as a pejorative, when it just simply means a certain type of philosophy, they're basically pure deontologists to the extent that they literally look. Here's my thing on the whole deontology and utilitarianism thing. There has to be some kind of sensible balance between them, right? If you're just pure utilitarian or pure deontologist, you get into these it just results in crazy conclusions. Like, for example, if someone is just a pure deontologist, which means they just only care about rules and they just don't care at all about outcomes, then yeah, that could happen. Someone could just make some kind of crazy thing that it's like, it's not okay to take one skin swab from a cow in order to end the animal holocaust. Now, that to me is an anti-vegan position. I mean, we can talk about whether it's vegan or not to perform whatever this is on an animal, and what degree of rights violation would be acceptable, whatever. But I know the group of people here that you're talking about. And for me, it just seems that they literally only care about rules. They do not care about outcomes for animals. And I do think that's dangerous. But what
So
a kind of... Yeah, go on.
Sure. Could I quickly chip in? So yeah, one of my, someone I know, he got into a little bit of a, message discussion with one of these people, and this person said it would not be okay even if there was one lion ripping apart 1 trillion vegan children. It would not be okay to stop the lion, with lethal
and I think this is just kind of indicative of just how ridiculous these reductios you can ultimately perform can get if someone is just a pure utilitarian or a pure deontologist, which is, it just shows how intellectually sloppy it is that they just throw this term utilitarian. I'm not even a utilitarian, by the way, but it's so intellectually sloppy that they just throw this term around to be like, oh, this is pure utilitarianism, blah, 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 as some kind of like evil, bad thing, when those people just hold such insane views themselves.
I'm not a utilitarian or a deontologist. I'm a threshold deontologist. And they'll throw out this insult utilitarian. And yeah, I'm pretty sure if I was going to ask them to define utilitarian, they'll not be able to, define it.
I said this many times about these people. I did a post about a certain group of people in the animal rights movement who had been acting in this way recently. And I think that was one of the points I wrote, is that they pretend to have like philosophical expertise and philosophical know-how, and they wouldn't even be able to pass a basic philosophy course. I'm not saying I would either. I'm no philosophy don, but holy shit, the way that they're doing this, it kind of makes it as if they kind of know the truth about everything, and they're trying to dick wave, let's call it, about this pretend kind of philosophical know-how that they have. But what are the arguments that you've seen that in some way, I don't know, justify predation or justify not intervening in the wild, or the kind of apathy for what's happening in nature, that sound to you like carnist arguments, that sound to you like, anti-vegan arguments? Because I'll level with you. I've seen a few, and it's just like, damn, these kind of sound like the arguments that non-vegans would make. But tell me what the ones you've heard.
Yeah, I would say this topic, wild animal rights, is when it turns sort of vegans as, it turns them or makes them use arguments which non-vegans tend to use. And when I made the comment, no one really replied for a month or so, and then one day someone just replied to my comment, and I didn't really look too much into what the thread was saying, because I've been in discussions with these people before, and it's very difficult to discuss with them. But the first sort of comment I saw in the first sentence, it mentioned like, how would you assign rights to non-moral how would you assign rights to moral
patience? Yeah.
So I guess like human babies, are they moral agents?
Yeah, so we can't give them rights by their logic. And
yeah, I would give rights to human babies. And what I mean by rights, as I've explained previously, is an action between two sentient. Well, a rights violation is when one sentient individual performs an action in the vacuum which would be wrong to perform based on my preferences. Yeah.
I think the main one I've noticed is just the appeal to nature fallacy. It's just a basic fallacy. That's the first thing you learn as a vegan to spot. This isn't bad. What's happening to animals in slaughterhouses? It's nature. In this case, it's just like, it's not bad what's happening because it's nature. And it's just like, well, okay, just because something's happening in nature, that doesn't mean it's morally justified. Now, you mentioned the things about moral agents and moral patients. What else do you see as the flaw in that argument when they say you can't assign a right to a moral agent and a moral patient? And for anyone listening, by the way, who's not familiar with these terms, it might be useful, actually, Patrick, if you could actually say what a moral agent is and what a moral patient is, because I think a lot of my listeners might not be familiar with those terms.
Well, yeah, normally when I just speak, have discussions, I don't really use these terms myself, moral agent, moral patient, but generally I'm guessing they mean by moral agent, someone who's capable of reflecting on the morality of their actions.
Mm-hmm.
And then moral patient is just someone who's, worthy of moral consideration when they're being acted on by a moral agent.
Interesting, because their definition would almost seem to be that it's not that. They're almost saying that moral... the people who are saying we shouldn't intervene in nature because you can't assign rights to moral patients, they're basically saying that moral patients are not worthy of having protections enacted to them, are not worthy of moral consideration. I think all they're just saying is a moral patient is a being who cannot rationalize rights and philosophy and be held accountable for their behavior with regards to morality. And
sorry to interrupt, I'll just elaborate a little bit more. What I meant was, you can correct me if you're seeing it differently. How I'm seeing is they're saying that humans are moral agents, so it's not okay that we violate moral patients. But in the wild, you've got a moral patient with a moral patient, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so they're ultimately saying that someone who wants to intervene in quote unquote rights violations in nature, they're kind of trying to say that humans are subjugating these beings somehow by forcing our implied morality onto those beings. Is there a fallacy there, or is there an inconsistency there you can kind of spot?
Well, you could sort of run the reductios on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
But two moral, yeah. So if you had two humans who are moral patients, let's say you had a human with the IQ of a lion and a human with the IQ of a zebra, and the human with the IQ of a lion just jumped on the human with the IQ of a zebra and started like eating their stomach out. By by their logic, we should not stop that because they're moral patients, and we shouldn't inflict like our morality onto them.
Yeah, if it was part of like the natural world, so if Jeffrey Dahmer was somehow found out to be, not capable of morality, and he was like, in nature, it'll be fine for him to hunt humans. Well, not humans, but babies, human babies.
And another maybe carnist sounding argument I've seen from some of the people who came down hard on certain people in that comments section on that post, such as yourself, is maybe a bit of that whole nirvana fallacy going on, or just an appeal to futility. It's just like, oh, you step on ants every time you leave the house. Again, that's literally a carnist argument.
And yeah, I think we've talked in many vegans have explained that stepping on ants, when you're traveling, for example, in a car, it's like an incidental death. It's not a rights violation. And, you don't know also the counterfactual situation. Potentially going for a walk in nature will actually reduce rights violations because you're going into a place which otherwise there would have been, animals attacking each other, and you're like making them disperse away.
And going back to the whole thing about your comment, which is why I wanted to do the podcast, saying you're not vegan if you don't care about wild animal rights. Let me tell you what my kind of stance is on this. I don't think wild animal suffering or rights, whatever, is actually a part of veganism. But what I do think, and where I just massively agree with your comment in a sense, is that if someone just greets what happens in nature with this kind of apathy and just says, oh, we shouldn't do anything about it and just who cares, it kind of raises a red flag for me about, are you really in this for animals, or are you just in this for rules? So just to clarify, in the same way that, I don't know, saving like a drowning human is not a part of, I don't know, gay rights activism or something, but it's just part of being, it's just another thing outside of that that's just good to do, and you could draw inconsistencies from it. I kind of think the same about that with the whole wild animal stuff. And it would just I get kind of suspicious about the person, is what I'm saying. So even though I think that it's not within the realm of veganism what's happening in nature, because it's not the exploitation of animals by humankind, it's animals killing each other and violating rights, in my opinion. I do believe in even though animals are moral patients, I do believe they can still violate the rights of others. But it's just suspicious to me. I mean, why would someone watch a video of a zebra just like screaming for their life, which sounds, pretty identical to the videos we hear in the gas chambers, for example, with the pigs and everything like that, and just comment, almost like, meh, who cares? It just seems that maybe a person like that might be in this movement not because they actually care about animals, but maybe because they're just obsessed with being part of some kind of club or want some kind of rule to follow. What do you think of my take on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting take. Obviously, I cannot know what they feel without speaking with them and getting to their values. But yeah, interesting viewpoint. Yeah, and they talk about not intervening, but humans, we're in nature. We are already intervening, whether we like it or not. Even building a house is intervening in nature. And a common sort of pushback you get when you talk about wild animal rights is that, do you expect all vegans to go out there, into nature, intervening? But like, just like, for example, there's murderers out there. I would not say someone doesn't believe in human rights if they're not going out there stopping all the murderers. It's like a morally virtuous thing to go out there if you can and stop these rights violations. But
yeah, now, because here's the thing: to a lot of my listeners right now, you and I, Patrick, we've just spoke a lot of hot air. We've just talked about, how horrible it is that someone could just be apathetic to all this. But then they just might say, okay, George and Patrick, great. What the hell are you going to do about it? What are you actually doing about this? So what do you say to those people who just say that talk about wild animal suffering is virtue signaling? Because what if to an extent they're kind of right? What if to an extent you and I are just sitting here having this conversation, but we haven't actually done anything today? Maybe we're not doing anything to actually deal with this. We're just here talking about how virtuous we are for caring about the poor zebra who got eaten in that video.
So I would say creating discussion is a good thing, especially considering, the pushback by people saying things, it's natural, it's the circle of life.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good thing to create discussion because humans are, developing technology. We've got ways to make a difference. And even if, for example, we could not stop all rights violations, like any sort of action which can help to reduce rights violations is a good thing. And even, whether it's not indexed to violation, but indexed to suffering, you can do things to reduce suffering, which is also a good thing as well. I also value suffering and well-being. You can, for example, in Planet Earth, there was a while ago, this is like the first time I sort of, questioned, whether wild animals are worthy of moral value. I was watching a Planet Earth documentary and there was a baby elephant lost from their mother. And then the film crew just let the wild elephant, just basically die from dehydration.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And then I asked my mom, I was like, why did they let the elephant die, the baby elephant die? And my mum said, you should not intervene in nature.
Right. And this attitude, this kind of documentary maker attitude, and maybe I'm a bit of a hypocrite here because I watch these nature documentaries and I enjoy their production. I enjoy watching them to a certain extent, as sad as they are, which is strange to say and makes me feel kind of bad for even saying that. But they're just extremely interesting. But it is bad that kind of documentary maker attitude has carried on into a movement where we're essentially meant to be assigning rights to animals and caring about what happens to them and saying, I will prevent this from happening to you. Do you think there is, though, on the part of the people saying it's virtue signaling, do you think that's another kind of like nirvana fallacy thing, as in like, if we can't be perfect or if we can't end it all, then why even bother? Don't even have the conversation at all. And, it's just, does that sound like a carnist argument to you where it's like, you vegans, you just go on the street and protest whatever, but you're not actually doing something about it. And, it'll never end in your life anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to know, how are they defining virtue signaling? What do they mean by that? Because if anything, I don't think it's virtually signaling because most people think it's justified. And then if you bring it up, they start calling you crazy.
So we spoke a moment ago about utilitarianism and deontology and that kind of stuff. Is the talk about wild animal suffering utilitarianism? Because that's one of the terms that he who shall not be named has thrown around so much recently. And I know he's listening to this podcast as well. I absolutely know he's going to listen to this. So, hey, how you doing, man, if you're listening to this? And I know you are. But what do you think to the idea that this is all just quote unquote utilitarianism, talking about wild animal suffering rather than focusing on the exploitation of animals caused by humankind?
So, utilitarian, the way I define it is, net increase in well-being, or
Mhm.
if you're negative utilitarian, net decrease, well, in suffering, right?
Mhm.
If for an action to be good. But yeah, I'm rights-based, so I'm basing it whether an action is vegan, whether there's an increase or decrease in rights violation, because you cannot really calculate whether, unless you have these numbers available to you, whether
Mhm.
an action increases overall, suffering, or decreases suffering, increases well-being. It's very difficult calculations to make. So what I think, I think an action is vegan, whether relevant to the counterfactual situation, whether there's, it's also difficult to know for sure, but whether there's a decrease in rights violations. So, for example, if you take a lion eating a zebra, I don't really care whether the lion gets more pleasure from the suffering from the zebra.
Right.
What I care, in my calculation, I'm looking at it in a vacuum and I'm thinking, okay, there's a rights violation taking place, one in this case. If you can
Mhm.
stop that, that's a vegan action.
So I want to talk now about this concept of rewilding, because I think I saw you mention that somewhere, but I can't remember where you mentioned that. Because this all relates to what we've been talking about. I'm not fully sure exactly what rewilding is, because I've heard it talked about before, but I kind of hear different definitions almost from people. Like, how do you define rewilding?
So, this is a good question actually, because I
Mhm.
don't really, I'm not a proponent, a big proponent of, these vegan documentaries where they mention rewilding in them and they talk
Yeah.
about reintroducing predators. So
Right.
rewilding, yeah, for me, if I was going to say what's a vegan version of rewilding, that would not involve reintroducing predators into empty space. Like, a vegan version of rewilding for me could be something like, hypothetically, if you just monocrop trees, or only, created marshland without predation there to soak up CO2, that could be a form of rewilding. But I would not say it's vegan to just take empty space and rewild, with predators just to, reduce global warming.
So have you seen vegans specifically engage in that? Have you seen vegans say, yeah, I think we should introduce bears and wolves or whatever back into this wood to control the herbivore population?
Yeah, so there's a documentary, I don't know, have you watched it? It's I Could Never Go Vegan.
Oh, I know of the documentary. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that in that documentary they talk about reintroducing predators, and
And
they big it up like it's such a good thing.
right. And why, Patrick? First let's try and be charitable. Why would they say it's a good thing? Let's steel man their argument here. Like, why are they saying to reintroduce predators, and what are the benefits of reintroducing predators? Because there's obviously some kind of good thing that comes from this, right? There's obviously some kind of benefit if people are saying that let's do this, including vegans. So, being charitable, what are the positives of introducing predators into a space?
So yeah, I'll try and get into their mindset. Nature is good. We need to restore nature. Restore nature
Yeah.
now.
And herbivores are destroying a certain amount of space. We don't want to be the human bullies and come in and introduce hunters who do it wrong and always cock it up. It's better to introduce to rewild natural predators who can actually live in like a symbiotic relationship almost with that ecosystem, and it has a good way of managing suffering. For example, the predators tend to pick off like the weaker animals, the older ones, whereas hunters usually kill the kind of the fit animals. And there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen from hunting as a result of that. So being charitable to their argument, it benefits an ecosystem to have predators in it. So then why would you, Patrick, oppose that? What's so bad about that?
So you can sort of run, again, a logical consistency test. If, for example, we found an island, a deserted island, and then we could rewild it with, human cannibals hunting other, I don't know, humans or another sentient species, and it would benefit, the island. It would make it look nice, or make it look visually appealing. There would be, the circle of life taking place, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be against that. Would you?
I would absolutely be against that. What have vegans who support rewilding said, though, when you put that hypothetical to them, or when you argue against rewilding?
I've specifically not, brought that hypothetical up, and yeah, it would be interesting to speak with them about it.
Yeah, that could be a debate I'd be willing to host, actually. The Patrick versus whoever rewilding debate. That could be good.
As I understand that rewilding, it's increasing the number of both herbivores and predators. So it's not like you're only introducing predators. Yeah. So you're taking empty space, which, because so many crops are used for animal agriculture, you can then remove this cropland and then instead reintroduce, food chains.
Oh, see, that makes it even crazier because, it's still bad, I think, when we're talking about an area that's, I don't know, inhabited by, they're talking about they need to introduce predators for some kind of benefit to that area and to the ecosystem and to the environment. That could be bad enough potentially, and a violation of that, the consistency test that you talked about there. But I think what's even crazier is if you don't specifically need to introduce any sentient life to the area. And it's like, we now must introduce sentient life to this area and have this essentially giant slaughterhouse in nature. I mean, that just sounds to me like building a slaughterhouse.
That's how I understand what these documentaries mean, rewilding, because they talk about, the cropland, so much land is used to grow food, which could, which we don't need to be growing. So that land could be saved. And then instead we can build these, natural slaughterhouses that you said, and then help reduce global warming.
Now, the post that you commented on that made me want to do this podcast, the argument that it proposed, it said that the end goal is to abolish predation. Do you agree with that? And what the hell does that mean? What would that look like?
So, there could be many different, I don't know what the best solution is, but there could be one, solution is just expanding, Nutrivores talked about this, expanding human infrastructure. So this is why, I'm not anti-natalist. I think from what I understand, you are anti-natalist.
I very much am, yeah.
Yeah, so I believe that there could be, violations taking place across the cosmos. So if humans, were going to wipe themselves out, or even if there was going to be extinction, like a mass extinction event on Earth, whether it's done by humans or naturally, I feel that eventually life could arise. It's possible that sentient life could arise again. So I do believe that it's important for humans to stay around.
So assuming we did, yeah, obviously I'm an anti-natalist, so I guess I would disagree with certain things you've said there, but let's just let's just deem it all true, grant it as true what you've said, and that we need to be here in order to do something. What does abolishing predation while we are here? We don't even need to talk about anti-natalism with this regard, because we actually are here. What does it look like even while we are actually here? Because, okay, expanding cities might be one thing, but that's not going to abolish predation. Predation is still going to happen, even if you expand human infrastructure. So what does abolish predation actually mean? Because, yeah, look, I want a world with no predation either. I don't want animals ripping each other apart. Not only do I not want slaughterhouses, I don't want to see any more of these horrible videos of the zebra being eaten alive either. But what will abolishing predation actually look like? What's the method? What do we do?
So if we, for example, just expand human infrastructure to cover the whole globe, with turn all wildland into, human synthetic parks instead and stuff like this, where there's actually no more food chains taking place. That could be one option. So, because for example, we've got cities now which are on which otherwise would be on wild land. So we're already doing it. I would, argue that we have, displaced predation by expanding our infrastructure.
The thing is,
that's
number one, predation would still occur in that regard because you'd have what are called liminal animals, right? The humans that the animals that kind of live in human spaces. It might invite more birds of prey, for example, because there'd be more like mice and stuff like that for them to pick off. So predation is still always going to occur, even if we expand humans' infrastructure and stuff like that, because you'll have liminal animals. And what would be the method then? Once we're in those spaces, do you go as far as to saying once we've got to that level, we would have to? I mean, I've seen some vegans, for example, assert that we should kill predators. I don't know if you go as far as that, or if you just think there's some way we can go to mitigate it or lower it. But the post specifically said abolish predation, and from what I gather, you might agree with that. So I'm just wondering what could be done in the event that predation is still around for as long as we have these cities covering every single space of wild land.
So yeah, I would be, okay with predator culling.
Interesting.
And then also there was actually a recent paper published about herbivorizing predators as a solution. That could be a potential.
Let me grill you on the predator culling thing a little bit, because obviously,
go ahead.
It's obviously a very, very controversial view that you hold within the vegan movement. What would you say to all the people kind of like shouting now at the podcast saying like, Foolproof Mastery is not vegan and this is a violation of vegan values? Because it's literally killing animals, right? I don't think, to the average vegan and to the average person who's trying to understand what veganism is, or who thought they understood what veganism was, that would sound obviously like a clear violation of vegan values, is killing animals. What do you say then to the people who'd be saying that you're not vegan because of that, or that at least you're violating the values of veganism or animal rights?
Sure. So first of all, I'm not saying that, you're not vegan if you're not out there killing animals, killing predators. Just like I wouldn't say someone is not against human rights if they're not out there stopping murderers. But all things equal, if it would be a better outcome to stop the rights violation. And then what you could do is, again, run a logical consistency test. You can swap a human for a zebra, and then I'll be interested to hear what they say, whether they'll be okay with a lion tearing apart a human. What sort of objections could they have? They might say, all right, it's a human, it's not natural food chain. Lions don't usually eat humans. But you can just then get reductios on that.
I've not heard. Here's the troubling thing. I've actually not heard vegans answer those, the trait equalizations there successfully. So it seems with regards to that, a logically consistent position, because every vegan that I've heard having those questions put at them when they say, this is wrong, whatever, you know, when it gets to the idea of putting a human in that situation and you have to kill the lion to save the human, they often come up with contradictions or just stuff that sound like carnist arguments. Here's my thing, though, about the killing predators thing. I do think, and this is why I think it's just such a mind fuck, basically, and why I don't fully sign off, or why I don't actually sign off on the view, is that I think it actually leads to a reductio the other way as well. So it leads to a reductio both ways, is the funny thing about the philosophical conundrum here. So, okay, it leads to one way, humans being eaten alive by xenomorphs or zombies or a lion going around who has to eat. It's part of the natural food chain that they eat these humans, whatever. Okay, great. Reductio. You know, I've been beaten, whatever it is, if, you know, I'm on the anti-culling predator side. The reductio the other way, though, is, I would say, it actually leads to an Inuit genocide. And you could actually equalize the traits. You know, you could keep, if someone says no, it doesn't, then you could just keep trait equalizing the Inuit. But ultimately, it's talking about killing off a group who need to eat animals to survive, holocausting them, eradicating them. So that's my reductio the other way. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I don't feel that's a reductio, to be honest. Yeah, I don't think the need for survival makes it justified. Like, if I was in a desert island, I would not, you know, murder a human baby for survival, because you're going to die anyway after that, most likely, unless you're saved.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you have a logically consistent position then. It's just that it's not something I could sign off on. I could not sign off on a genocide of indigenous peoples who eat animals to survive if that was the only way to stop them. I understand if someone was if someone wanted to sign off on that for logical consistency, but that wouldn't be a bullet that I'd be willing to bite, kind of thing.
In this hypothetical, is it possible to you know, chat with them, get them to follow you know, vegan values?
Well, no, because we could just we just equalize the traits each time. So I just say no, you can't, to every single thing.
But yeah, I don't find that really a reductio, to be honest.
Well, very consistent, at least, I guess. Is there a chance, though, that positions like this, Patrick, could, like, not just that, but even just this whole conversation, but I mean, particularly the stuff about killing predators, but even just the talk about going into wild animals, suffering and intervening in nature, is there a chance that all this could kind of muddy the waters about what veganism is and hold the movement back? Because this is a common criticism that you will have heard, right? That this is going to, I don't know, make veganism sound crazy. It's going to extend the scope outside of what humans are doing, in the same way that intersectionality kind of muddies the waters and kind of makes it this like all lives matter movement, which is hypocritical to obviously their values, because they say saying all lives matter is bad to BLM. Is there a chance that doing this is kind of like all lives mattering the animal rights movement, and it's also just making us just look crazy? I mean, killing lions and like, or stopping or herbivorizing predators. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think so. If anything, all the experience I've had, it makes me seem more reasonable. Like, I've got, you know, a few non-vegan people that I know, and they're like, I've had a few conversations where like, but you're okay with, you know, lions eating, you know, zebra? And I'm like, no, I'm not, you know. And then they're like, oh, okay, that seems reasonable then, you know, you're logically consistent.
Yeah, they might have been the conversations you've had, but you have to say there is also a significant number of non-vegans. I'd say most non-vegans, from what I've seen, would think that it's kind of crazy to intervene in the wild and stop this. Even if they thought you were being consistent, even if they thought, okay, this Patrick guy is consistent, okay, he would stop the lion killing the zebra, whatever. That's great. That's consistent. That doesn't necessarily mean that it might actually slow down veganism, because then they think, well, now I have to take that position.
Well, first, yeah, I would say that I'm not saying that I would stop the lion, because I'm not sure whether I would be able to kill someone. But what I'm saying is the best option to do it. So like if someone was controlling me and they had the choice, what would be the best outcome? It would be to stop the lying. But I'm not saying I could kill someone. But yeah, in terms of outcomes, yeah, you're stopping a rights violation. Yeah, and then I actually got an interesting point earlier on about the hypothetical you brought up. I do think there will be some cases where like say if we were many years ago before the invention of vitamin B12, and where humans could not survive, what would you do then? If you were hypothetically living, I don't know, 500 years ago. Like, I know many people bring up that you could be vegan you could follow a completely plant-based diet by eating, drinking unwashed water, dirty water and stuff like this. I don't really, I think like until the invention of B12, it was very difficult to follow a completely plant-based diet. But then, some people could say, in this situation, it could be justified to murder animals in order to then eventually create a vegan world, to then synthesize vitamin B12. But if I was in this situation, I would potentially say you could eat, non-sentient animals. That might be a better go around. Or animals with a lower degree of sentience, if we were born in a time where humans had to eat animals.
But are you saying, but are you saying that relates somehow to maybe overcomplicating veganism and making it seem less appealing to the public, or is that just a separate point?
I was just talking about the hypothetical you brought up with the Inuits.
Sure, okay, yeah.
So if they were the only sort of humans around on the planet, and they were doing it with the goal to, across the time span of the universe, reduce rights violations, that could be justified, I guess. But they could eat non-sentient animals such as oysters, or animals with a lower degree of sentience.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we even know that oysters aren't sentient? Would you say it's conclusive that they're not sentient, or?
So I would say it's possible that they have some, degree of sentience. But then there's also a reductio on the oysters. I had a call with someone sometime because I was like at some point I was very pro oyster rights. Then I had a call with someone and he brought up the tumor reductio with regards to oysters. That like some tumors, they have more complex nervous system than oysters. So are you going to give tumors rights?
That's interesting, but we don't ever assume that a tumor could be sentient, whereas there is something about an oyster that would make them sentient. Otherwise, surely science would just say this, because from what I've heard, even the scientific community is kind of unclear about whether oysters are sentient or have some semblance of sentience, but they've never once raised this about tumors.
So from what I've seen, that what can oysters be sentient? I don't know. Like I've not seen, like they've got nerve ganglia, they've got no brain, so it depends on what we're defining sentience to be. Can they sort of react to light? They've got eyes, so
I'm gonna
I don't eat oysters, so but
fair enough.
But I was thinking at some point that potentially if oysters were not sentient, it could be vegan to farm oysters to displace the wild ocean. That could be an option if they're not sentient for sure. But but I do believe there can be a sort of amount where there's like there's a trivial level of sentience as well.
Okay, I want to move on to just some activism related stuff just to end the podcast. But just before we move on to that, what would kind of be your final message to those people who say that they are vegan for not wanting to intervene in nature, or even that they are vegan for not caring about wild animal rights or believing that wild animals don't have rights? What would you say to those people?
So I'll just say that you're going to be prone to reductios. If you give moral value to sentient beings, why aren't you giving them moral value when they're being violated in nature? Like, why do you care about whether, the perpetrator is capable of moral reasoning or not? It's possible that animals are capable of some degree of morality. So it depends on what we mean by moral, moral agents as well. Because I do think like animals, non-human animals, sentient animals are capable of some degree of morality, very low.
Right.
I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I do agree that we do know, for example, rats possess the ability to like empathize with each other and must have some kind of basic understanding of right and wrong. And I think the only reason we understand right from wrong, or claim to at least, is because we are an evolved species of animal, and I think animals need a sense of morality to even be here in the first place, because without some sense of right or wrong, a species fails, it falls apart. So I'm not saying animals can process it and philosophize about it to anywhere near the level that humans can. I do see them as moral patients more than moral agents. We can't hold them accountable for these actions, but there's obviously something there in many species of animal for sure. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, and something people say when you bring up also wild animal rights is, should we be putting animals in jail? And that's not what my position is. It's just that the action is not justified because they're not capable of the same level of moral reasoning as most humans. But most humans don't have the best moral reasoning anyway. But
so, a very interesting chat there, Patrick, about the wild animal suffering stuff and about your comment, because that was a pretty spicy comment that you left on the Instagram vid, and I like that. That's why I wanted to get you on. And I know you certainly hold some controversial positions about the culling predators and about the whole Inuit stuff that I mentioned as well. So I think if anyone wants to talk to Patrick about that after listening to this podcast, that could be really good, and I'd be willing to host like debates and stuff on that. So that's that could be good.
The last sentence I'll just add to that if you're going to get into a debate, most vegans that try to argue for predation end up looking like psychopaths.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we can save that for when someone wants to potentially debate you on that, because that could be juicy. So I've noticed on your Instagram and stuff lately you've been posting a lot of like street outreach content from like the London activism scene. Tell me about how all that's kind of going and any groups that you're doing activism with, and just tell me about how all that stuff is kind of going there.
Yeah, it's going fun. I quite enjoy it. Like in my free time, I enjoy speaking with people. I like a bit of social interaction. So I've pretty been like part of most of the groups there. Speciesism, WTF, I did that last weekend. There's also We the Free, WTF. We Stand for the Animals, Earthlings Experience, Vegan Debates. We the Free is quite enough.
Yeah, that's good that you've been doing it with all those groups. Is there because I haven't been part of the London scene for quite some time now, but that was where I cut my teeth, so to speak. I actually started the first AV chapter in the UK back in 2016. So I was very active, obviously, in the street outreach scene in London before I moved to Bristol. Has AV still got a few chapters in London? Have you volunteered with them at all?
Yeah, AV's around as well. I think there's an event this Sunday in Covent Garden. They're still going. And
that's where it all started. That was the debut AV in the UK, was at Covent Garden. So yeah, that's
I'll just quickly add that I did We the Free in Canterbury last weekend, and non-vegan called the police on me because I refused to spud their hand.
Oh my god! What was their complaint to the police?
So basically, he wanted to spud me, and I just said, if we were in 1950s talking about human rights, and someone said they're not gonna, stop, they're not gonna start supporting human rights, I would not shake their hand. And then he went to the police and said I was racist, basically, because of that. But
oh my lord, yeah, it's unbelievable. just what triggered babies people can get. That's a pretty
And then
classic case.
he verbally abused me, and then he went and said, "I'm going to call the police." And then he admitted it to the police that he verbally abused me, but it's okay. I didn't press charges.
And what did the police say about his complaint?
The police, I explained them why I did this action, and the police, yeah, I can see I eat meat, but I understand what you're doing. But yeah.
So they had to be kind of impartial, whatever, and they probably thought this guy's complaint was just ridiculous. You can't call the police because someone doesn't spud you, basically.
Yeah, but that was like an interesting situation. I've never had that before.
And how experienced would you say you are on street outreach at the moment? Do you, because I'm just wondering if this is something you're kind of new to, or have you been doing this for a few years, but only just recently kind of started recording?
No, I've been doing it since about 2023. Since 2023, I was doing masters in Switzerland at the time. I started with AV in Switzerland. Then we also did debate tables there, where you just put a table, put like a board, like come and debate, and then you debate. And then, yeah, the thing about not shaking the hand I learned during an AV workshop, actually.
Oh, Paul Bashir loves the non-handshake, doesn't he? He's quite, he's had quite the influence on the don't shake someone's hand unless they pledge to go vegan.
I should have because I saw it was getting heated, but I did it anyway.
Who would you say have been influential to you with regards to street outreach and getting out there and speaking on the street? Is there any content creators, people that you can recommend to the listeners now with regards to that, who maybe inspired you to start doing the same?
Yeah, so I'm quite a big fan of Harry. He's Eat Pussy Not Animals on Instagram.
Yep.
He's great. He's also, quite good for, philosophically. He's also got very similar views to me, particularly on, as I understand, trans rights, God as well. Empty Cages is great. Danny Ishay, formerly Lifting Vegan Logic, convinced me to go vegan.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Logical Consistency. I enjoy watching his outreach, although he's one of those people that would not commit one rights violation to create a vegan world.
Really? That's interesting. You'll have to press him on that. But any others at all?
We're thinking about doing a debate at some point, potentially, or a discussion on that. But if people are interested, we can definitely organize something, whether one rights violation to end animal agriculture forever is justified. We can have a chat. It's Jamie's Corner is great as well.
Yep.
Very motivational. Who else? Then there's someone called Darshan Kam from India. I've been enjoying watching his activism recently. Then on my channel, I did a propositional logic course, formal logic with Aputa. He's been, we did a 14-hour course on formal logic. And also YouTube. I've done streaming with Vegan Postmortem as well. They have a great channel as well.
I saw that one, and I think he who shall not be named tried to join the stream and got swiftly booted off. Yeah, because you actually streamed about the debate I hosted, didn't you?
Yeah, that was
on wild animal suffering. Yeah.
We didn't get through the whole video.
No. I was like, what, guys? You cut off at you hardly got anywhere near through it, actually, I don't think. It was quite a long debate, though, maybe so.
Yeah, he did come on, and he sort of did bite a bullet a tiny bit. He shall not be named.
We're going to be getting loads of comments now on the YouTube version of this podcast, like, George, who is this person you're talking about? But anyway, Patrick, thank you for coming on the show. Thought it was a really interesting chat. And I just want to thank you for obviously making that comment on that post recently, whether people agree with it or not. Because you know what? It provokes discussion. It provokes discussion about what veganism is. Should we expand the definition? Are we being too rigid, or are we actually expanding it too much by going into this? But whatever people's beliefs are on this, I think it was a good spicy comment, and It was interesting talking to you, man. So thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a very unexpected invite, but great to chat on this topic.
Yeah, no problem, man. Cheers, Patrick.